Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
I really like writing APIs, and it's not just because I don't like CSS. But one of the things I thought we could talk about today is the idea of having a formal API specification document. Like as developers, we enjoy when we're consuming an API, Stripe, whatever, the how they have documentation and they have a spec and you know what fields are required. But I don't see it a lot on like Laravel projects, especially APIs for internal use only. And I think there's a benefit in having it. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as a topic, get your take on it, and kind of talk through our reasons.
Yeah, it's funny because you bring that up, and then a lot of times we'll be like, as developers, like, oh, this the API doesn't have good documentation. It's crap, and I have to figure it out, blah blah. And then when it comes time to writing your own, you're like, well, no, I mean, I don't,
Yeah, just
I
look
don't
at
have
the
time to
code.
do that. Yeah,
Yeah,
just look at the code. Like, I don't have time to write a
right.
doc. If you have access to the code, you have access to the doc.
The code is documentation. I mean, it is, but are you at least with me on the premise
Yep,
then
yep,
that we
very
should
much so.
it's beneficial to have
Yep.
documentation?
But tell me why.
I will tell you why. Um, I can think of a couple reasons. Like maybe I'll start with the first one, which I consider more non-obvious, which is like the act of formalizing your specification, writing it out. And I would just say writing it out before you build it. Like this is going to be key. It forces you to think through the API requirements in a more diligent way than if you're just going to like sit down and start like, all right, here's a resourceful controller. I'm going to write some form requests. Like it's an extra step of thought before you dive in. And I have found that very beneficial when, especially with a client, like where they're asking you to build this API endpoint and they've maybe even given you some requirements, but there's always like something not specified. And so writing that initial specification sort of surfaces a bunch of questions that might not
Hmm.
otherwise get asked.
Yeah, it reminds me of many years ago when I joined a company that had a really large programming team, and they had a lot of these systems in place. I was a very young programmer, and they would require us to do design documentation before every single ticket. So once you had quoted the project, then the next step was to actually pull out a document and just write up what you were going to do, what the risks are to your changes, et cetera. And then you give it to the systems analyst to get approved before you start doing your work. And at the time, I felt that that was super annoying because I'm a young developer and I have lots of spirit and go get 'em attitude, and I don't need any of this process. And looking back, I think there was so much benefit from doing that, but some of the stuff still felt a little kludgy. And so I think those APIs are a nice middle, like the API documentation is a nice middle spec because, or middle step. And I think you'll probably get to this because they're documentation, but they're not just documentation for one party. They're useful in
Mhm.
many different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm just kind of curious that design document, that's more like software design, right? It's not like
Yeah.
UI
Yeah.
design, but it's like here's what I'm going to build and how what sorts of files I'm going to use to build it and stuff like that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, so like maybe it would be good to pause and like talk a little bit more about like what's in a spec. I'm just if somebody's listening and they've never
Sure.
written one, maybe they've only consumed the HTML generated version of somebody else's spec. But at a minimum, it's going to specify things like what are the endpoints, right? Like what is the URL? What is it a get? Is it a post? Does it have parameters? Are those parameters headers? Are they in the path? Are they part of the query string? Are they required? Are they optional? What are accepted values? And that's more on the input side. And there's more. Like obviously, if it's a post that has a form body, like each one of those fields is going to have a level of specification. Is it a string? Is it a date time? What
Hmm.
is the format? What's the maximum length? Like I could just keep rattling these off. But there's also on the response side, like what could I get back? Well, and a lot of times like, well, you get a 200 back. Like, okay, good. Um, what if I don't have a token? Well, then you get a 401. Okay, all right, all right. What if my user isn't part of that project I'm updating? Oh, well, you get a 403. Like, but you see what I'm saying? Like
Mhm.
most endpoints are going to return multiple responses, maybe a 404, maybe a 422, maybe I mean, we even specify things like is it 405? Like if you try to post to some
406.
well, 406
That
is the media type one, right? This is
yeah,
riveting, like
yeah.
numbers.
This is
But
yeah.
anyways, there's different things like, hey, this is a JSON endpoint. You didn't send me except JSON. Or this is a GET endpoint. You sent me a post. But anyways, these are all different types of responses. And Laravel takes care of a lot of those for you. Like you're not manually constructing a 422 and returning it. But if you have a form request that fails validation, it's going to return that. And it's going to have a certain shape to the payload. And just, but like I'm scratching the surface, but you can see kind of going through this checklist, like, well, could it return this in what scenarios? It's going to trigger a lot of conversations that might not otherwise happen. So that's where I see some value, and I think we're on the same page there.
Well, let me argue against that real quick though, because
Okay.
I again living in the real world, that seems like a lot of work to do ahead of time when
Okay.
maybe your requirements are not fully fleshed out. Like
Hmm.
like I said, it gives you questions to ask,
Yeah.
but at some point the client's going to be like, "This is too much in the weeds. I don't know the answer to that." Like I
Oh,
don't
oh,
know what
that's
the
fair.
maximum, or I
Yeah.
don't care what the maximum length of a first name is.
Yeah.
So why are you asking me that? If it can be forever long, I don't care.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Like there are going to be. It depends on who your client is. If it's a technical stakeholder, they might. I'm just thinking of a project we were working on. They provided like here's the database schema that this endpoint is going to use. Like so, a lot of those questions would be answered. But yeah, the non-technical business owner, I don't know, like 100 for a first name. Like so, you're going to have to fill in some of those answers for them and maybe get them to validate it for you. But I agree. Like you don't want to spend a month to write an API spec for a simple endpoint that's going to take you half a day to build. Um, so there is a balance there as well. And I would just counter because I think one of the resistance points for something like this is like it is going to take a lot of time. The
Mhm.
first one you write well, but honestly, it's a lot of copy pasting. And there's tooling. I haven't found a tool I really like, but it isn't that hard to write a spec. It's a YAML document, right? And it's got some basic structure to it. And there's even things for code reuse, right? So you don't have to specify the full payload of a 422 in every one of your endpoints. Like you can define it once and reference that in your endpoints. So there's ways to make this not a huge ordeal. Let's shift gears a little bit. The second half of that is the person consuming the documentation. Now I sort of
Yeah.
set up
What's the use of this? That's
right.
a good
Okay.
question. Like, so it's been all written up. Maybe it
Yep.
gets approved, and then
Hmm.
what?
Okay. So let's put aside any value you derive from the exercise of writing it to help you shape the requirements. Maybe you don't care about that. Let's what are the other benefits? And again, I'm gonna stay focused on an internal API. We're not building Stripe. We're building something that our own front end or mobile app or whatever is going to consume. So um, and I'm even going to go a step further. Let's say you are the person that's going to implement it, right? So you're not handing this off to some other team, and like I'm trying to take out a lot of reasons to like ignore this. So it's
Okay,
just
so you're doing
you.
the front end and you're doing the back end,
Sure,
and
yeah.
they're possibly
Let's
different stacks that
yeah.
don't play well together for whatever reason.
Maybe. Okay. Right. Right. So, because I think most people would recognize, oh, if there's another team building the front end, then yeah, there's some more value for the spec, but that's not my case. So let's just say you're doing both sides of it. Um, Having the spec keeps you honest when you're building it, right? So, we will use some tooling. I can't remember the name of the package, but in our feature tests, when we're making requests and responses and getting a response and asserting against it, you can make assertions. This response adheres to the Open API specification. You can also do that for the request. We've had a little bit of challenges doing that universally, but the same thing exists there where the request that's being sent in also is something that the spec says is valid. And that has huge value because there's, especially with two separate code bases like a mobile app and an API, you don't ever want to get out of agreement as to what something should be returning. And if you're shipping an update to an API and you think, oh, I'm just adding a field here, but you actually broke something else, like you would want to know that before it makes its way into production. And that specification is the basis for a whole bunch of fairly simple tests that can be written in your existing feature tests to catch deviations like that.
So it really sounds like when you're working with internal APIs, the spec is definitely in the form of a contractor or a PHP interface
Mhm.
when it comes to the value for the internal API is what you're saying. Like if it's external, we are obvious. We have to document it for people and we get that. But
Yeah.
internal, it's more like, well, I want to start programming with interfaces when necessary. And so this is a step in that direction, but for APIs.
Sure. Like I hadn't even thought about the implementation details of it. Is that what you're talking about? Like when you say interface, you literally mean like a PHP interface?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's true. Like you could write interfaces that adhere to that. I'm just saying, like, if you agreed that this endpoint is going to return a 201 versus a
Oh,
200,
yeah. I mean conceptually,
conceptually, okay.
the
Yeah.
idea is
Yeah.
that this is like an interface
Right.
class
Yes.
in PHP to like your
Yes.
service or
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it keeps you honest. Like so like with a literal interface, if you don't satisfy part of its contract, you're going to get an error in PHP. With your feature tests, if you deviate and you start returning to 200 when you said it was going to be a 201, like it will catch that and your test will fail and you can fix it. And if you really do want to change it, then you can change the spec and whatever mechanism you have to like update the front end at the same time. Like that's fine. It's not written in concrete, but it's a conscious change you're making versus like, oops, or, maybe you update a package that's helping generate your responses or Laravel changes something. Like these are all things that will enforce your contract with the front end. So I can tell Aaron, I've convinced you that this is a valuable
yeah.
thing to do.
There's
I,
lots of
I
convincing
laugh because
required.
you're probably the first one who made me do it, but I'm here like, yeah, this is my idea. But anyways, like I think it's worth considering, and if you've never done it and you're listening to this, I'd say give it a try, and I think you will find value in it.
Cool. So I don't know if you're like me, which you're not. But if you go to
Some
a
ways I am.
hotel, go to a hotel or go to an Airbnb or something like that,
Mhm.
what's the first thing you do when you enter?
Hmm. Take my shoes off.
Okay, yeah. So we're definitely different people.
Okay.
Um, the first thing I do when I enter like a strange place like that, and mind you, I grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay.
So a lot of how I make decisions was based on the culture at the time. There were a lot of scary movies.
You're checking behind the shower
Um,
curtain.
that's literally what I do when I
No.
come to a place. I go through each room and I look in every single room
Hmm.
behind all the different curtains. I look underneath the bed just to make sure that there's no one in there, which there never is and there never will be. But you just don't know.
Well, I think looking under the bed, you could see something scary that's not a person, and some things are better unknown.
No, man, I don't want to be sleeping above that much dirt.
Yeah. Well, now I'm gonna have to like sweep the room myself when I stay in my next hotel.
Oh, because of all the dirt. Nice. Joel's getting really gross with this marketing stuff. He's talking about things like funnels and newsletters, but actually, the daily newsletter, it's actually really good.
If you want to see it for yourself, head over to masteringlaravel.io. The sign up form is right at the top of the page.